So they took this guy, turned him into this guy, and then they went to space, and he's actually part alien, and this dude's his brother? This is a Final Fantasy game? Space? What?
So our story begins.
So Final Fantasy IV. Hey, what is up everyone? Me llamo Rizzo, aka Aethel, and welcome to my Final Fantasy IV review of sorts. So after almost a year of me beginning this journey of the ultimate Final Fantasy experience, your boy is back, and I can finally say I have successfully finished Final Fantasy IV. Okay, so at this point, this is the last out of all the pixelated games that I had left to play. I played 5 and 6, and then I played 1, 2, 3. It was really hard to not constantly compare this game with all the others that I had before. Now, I will say overarching, this is me talking about this game from the perspective as someone who played it in 2022, and while I will give it some forgiveness in some areas because it is an old game, I think it's fair to compare it with the games that came out at around its time. So any of the pixelated games, fair game. 1 through 6 specifically. So where does this game stand? First of all, let me say I am finally so happy to say that I've beaten all of the pixelated games. That just gets me so hype. I have to include that in here. And if you're watching this in order, well, you still got 2 more reviews, but just know as of now, I finally finished all of them, and this is the last one I've played. So on that note, let me segue into saying, I think the best way to experience these games is literally, if you're planning on playing all of them, starting with 1 and ending with 6. I took a really interesting journey where I played the 2 newest ones out of the pixelated ones and then started with the other 3 and then ended right in the middle with 4. And I genuinely do think it impacted my experience with this one just a little bit.
Just a little bit.
So Final Fantasy 1, it is the basics of the basics, yeah? It's a simple, beautiful RPG. It's what started it all. Final Fantasy 2, well, everybody hated this game. I enjoyed it. I loved it. Not so much story-wise, but gameplay-wise, I enjoyed how they went about the whole leveling up system. So that's what makes that unique. Final Fantasy 3 was the first 3D game that I played. It introduced the job system. And even though 1, 2, and 3 don't really have much story, in 3 you can kind of start to see them implement some story. Final Fantasy 5, the first game that I played on my Final Fantasy journey. Some would say I started with the best, or one of the best. Being able to get gameplay wise, you know, having all these different jobs to experiment with. I love that out of all of them, this is kind of like the silliest one story wise. I mean, the main bad guy turns into a freaking splinter at some point. He turns himself into a splinter. I am not joking, everyone. So that was an awesome game. And then you have Final Fantasy 6, which has like 13, 14, something like that. So many playable characters, and it is the most story-driven one out of the bunch. They finally learned how to give us that complex, interesting story that we wanted. One of the best Final Fantasy games I've ever played. So where does this one stand? I told you all things that I like about all the other games and things that make them stand out for me. This unfortunately is like the middle child, or it has some elements from the old games and some elements from the new games, but it's not quite great at any of them. I am really struggling to tell you guys what is the thing from Final Fantasy IV that I'm taking away that I loved. I was able to do that with all the other 5 games, 1, 2, and 3, and 5 and 6, but I'm struggling with this one. In this game, the ATB gauge got introduced, but I had already experienced that in 5 and 6. In this game, we finally were able to have more than 4 characters on your team. In this game, you finally had some characters that were a little bit more developed, had more of a backstory, unlike in 1, 2, and 3. This time, you really kind of get to know these characters, but it was done a lot better in 6. And again, it doesn't have the cool, intricate job system that 5 and 3 have. It's hard to enjoy like Final Fantasy 1 in terms of just a simple RPG because again, this is where it kind of started to get complex and convoluted. And obviously the thing that I love from Final Fantasy 2 is not present in this game, which is the way that you level up. So what makes Final Fantasy 4 stand out for me? It is that perfect transition game so that Final Fantasy could evolve into what Final Fantasy 6 is today. I cannot say it's a bad game. I just think that in the order that I played this game, by the time I got to it, I had already experienced, you know, some of the best things about this game in either the older games or the newer ones. Also, to be completely transparent with you guys, I'm just gonna mention it, just gonna say it, because it's a thing, and I'm aware that it could have affected my experience. I actually started this game months ago. I started streaming it a while back. Right around the same time that I uploaded my last Final Fantasy video, I was playing this game and streaming it. And you know how sometimes life happens. I ended up falling out of that game and streaming other games, and then I finally got that Final Fantasy fatigue. After 5 games and 5 different videos, I was fatigued of Final Fantasy, and I said, no, I don't want to play this game right now because when I do play it, I want to fully enjoy it, and I find myself just kind of getting tired of it. I was kind of bored with it. And I said, this game deserves a fair shot, so I'm going to come back to it. You know, it's been almost a year now, so it's about time. And unfortunately, I think I can process and explain to you all why it was not just the fatigue happening, or just the fact that I kind of fell out of it. But there were some other things in this game that kind of turned me off, like the things I already explained. There was the uniqueness. There was nothing unique out of all the other Final Fantasy games that I played. I could tell you one thing unique about them. This one, I beat it, and even while I was playing it, I couldn't find anything. So now that I've given you kind of that overview as to how I feel about this game, let's get into the details. Let's get into the nitty gritty. Let's start off with the story. So the story has to do with this warrior named Cecil, which I'm just gonna put this right out there. One of the coolest looking characters out of the 6 that I've played before. If not the coolest. I think that would be one of the things that I would take away from this game. He is the coolest, look-wise, the coolest looking character in my opinion. He looks really cool when he has his Dark Knight armor, and then he looks really cool when he has his Paladin armor. Now let me explain. Now the way that they wanted this game to play out was, this guy starts off as like an evil character, and as the game progresses, he starts to become more good, and literally going from a Dark Knight to a Paladin. Again, that's how the game was supposed to play out. How I felt like it actually played out was, the moment you start the game, you already feel like Cecil, who, even though he has his Dark Knight armor, he just sounds like the nicest of nice guys around, and he just already, he feels so guilty, and you can just tell. But not even the kind of guilt where like, you can tell he used to be evil and now he feels bad. Nah, it's like from the very beginning, you just, from the dialogue to the voice acting in the remake, I just never got the vibes like he was ever a bad guy at all. For example, let's compare him to another Square Enix character, Riku. In Rechain of Memories, you can see him go through his redemption arc. And all of Kingdom Hearts 1, he is clearly the bad guy. You see him make mistakes. You see him, you know, succumb to the darkness. All of Rechain of Memories is about him, you know, leaving the darkness, and which is actually kind of cooler because he doesn't just like let go of the darkness and become full light, but he learns how to use the darkness to be a good guy. But anyways, let's not act like we've never seen the whole bad guy to good guy trope. Unfortunately, even though I can tell that this is what this game wanted to do, it just kind of skipped out and didn't show us the whole bad guy part. I'm going to show you guys the cutscene with the 3D remake, which is right at the beginning of the game. You can see how guilty he sounds, and again, does this sound like a bad guy to you?
Is a crystal worth all this? Robbing a peaceful people of what's theirs by right. What need could be so great?
At least Riku, Todoroki, and Sasuke, they all, like, when they're going through their bad guy phase, they look bad. They sound evil. You kind of get the sense that they're a jerk. I never felt that way with Cecil. So that's one place where it kind of falls a little bit short, right? And even look at this scene with the kid, man.
Then the dragon we slew was her mother's?
You're the ones who killed her dragon?
Forgive us. We've no idea this would happen to your mother.
Now just look at Cain, for example. Like, hear him here. Like, look to his voice. Listen to his voice.
He wished this village torched.
Now that is what a bad guy sounds like. And that is what I always thought Cecil was gonna sound like, based off of his just pure super cool Dark Knight appearance. But literally the entire time, he sounds like this. Just in bad guy armor, which I guess kind of works, but I'm just saying, kind of missed the mark there for me. So as you're going through this journey, and clearly Cecil is trying to become a good guy, you meet a couple different characters. One of my favorite characters, Rydia, which you kind of already saw in this cutscene with Cain and you know, yeah. They end up killing her mom. Now, kind of like my Final Fantasy VI review, this review is also gonna have some spoilers. I mean, the beginning of the video kind of already showed that, but anyways. Let's keep going. They actually do something really cool with Rydia, which her village gets destroyed by fire. She's a mage. She's a summoner. She knows how to use magic, and eventually her and the team that she ends up being a part of, she has to use fire to get through this ice wall. And it's kind of cool how she's like, I don't want to use fire because of the freaking thing that happened to her town in fire. Already kind of like giving this character some oomph, you know what I'm saying? More than I felt with Cecil. I saw no really growth in Cecil because from the very beginning I'm like, nah, you're a good guy. You might have bad guy armor, but from the very beginning, like, you sound like a good guy. You kind of look like a bad guy, but you really are a good guy. With Rydia, I got to see some growth. And then quite literally, I got to see her grow when after she falls into some water, some magic mumbo jumbo happens. She joins the party a little bit later in the game, and she's just like an adult now. She's all grown up. All grown up with you. So almost that alone is, I genuinely did not see that coming, and when she came back as an adult, I was like, this is freaking cool. Now that's an example of a time that this game actually kind of subverted my expectations and did something that I really didn't expect, and I liked it. I really enjoyed it. Now we're going to talk about the portion of the story that ties in with the title of this video, the one where everyone dies. Sike! I mean, a lot of people do die in this game, a couple of main characters, but the fact that it's more so the amount of characters that end up dying and they end up just... Anyways, let's go down the line of characters, and cause I want to talk a little bit about them, kind of hide in 6, and tell you if there's anything that stood out to me. Kain is dope. Kain is probably one of my favorite characters. No, Cecil's probably still my favorite in this game, but... or Rydia. Oh my gosh. Kain is really cool. I finally get to have a Dragoon on my team. Now, even though he kept coming and going, the times that I did have him as a part of my team was super cool. He felt super strong, he looked super cool, and he acted like a cool guy. Rydia I already talked about. I guess now we can talk about Rosa, which is Cecil's love interest. In terms of her personality, I can't really say that I saw anything that really makes her be like, oh, she's so cool. But what does add some points to her is the fact that she's a white mage. And I know that doesn't really make sense, but all I know is when she finally joined my team, I got excited because I was like, I have a white mage, and she looks really cool, and I knew she was gonna join, and I know that she's Cecil's love interest, and I'm liking their relationship, so I just want her to join. Let's just say, compared to some other white mages in other Final Fantasy games, I was digging her. Like, she was really cool. Okay, then we have Gilbert, which I mean, I know I'm not the only one who doesn't like him, and it's kind of like I kind of wanted to like him, but he, as many others on this list, suffers from the whole thing of just not being able to be a part of my team for long enough for me to really grow attached to him. Because I mean, I don't mind the I've seen it before. That's the whole thing with this game. I've seen it before. Kind of like cowardly partner who isn't really that good in the battlefield, but they're part of the team and you end up loving them anyways. I think even though this is part of the gameplay, I'm just gonna say it, part of the reason why it was so hard to really fall in love with a lot of these characters is because they're just not part of your team for long enough for you to grow attached to them. And again, even though this is something that they end up perfecting in Final Fantasy VI, this game just suffers in that regard. So Gilbert, you suffered from that, and even though like I get your thing, and you know I feel like I could have liked you if you would have stuck around with me a little more, but you didn't. Then we got Yang. Yang's really cool. Yang is this really cool monk guy who's bald and is just has the blonde hair, and he's a cool guy. And he actually was a part of my team for a little bit longer than most characters for me to be like, yeah, I like him. Sid I liked. Sid kind of shows up as all the other Sids show up in Final Fantasy games. And okay, I understood the role of this Sid. Kind of a loudmouth, kind of, I feel like this is the kind of Sid who, if he had the chance and this was like more of an R-rated game, he'd be really raunchy, you know what I'm saying? But he's just a good guy. He repairs ships. Also suffers from the fact that he wasn't really in my party long enough for me to grow attached to him. Palom and Param. Okay, so these twins weren't in my party for that long, but the little bit that they were, I actually really liked how they played, like gameplay wise, and I enjoyed them. They kind of were something that I hadn't really seen in these games before. These two actually stood out to me a little bit more compared to some of the other characters in this game. It was cool seeing two kid twin mages that actually end up doing something pretty important in the story later down the line to save your character. I like the way that they talk. I like the way that they interact with each other. Really memorable characters. I like them. Then you got Tella. Tella's cool. I mean, he's the old mage. He has the whole cool thing that like just driving him with the death of his daughter. Daughter was actually dating Gilbert the coward. Gilbert is actually a prince. Anyways, kind of interesting and weird that when he's a part of your team, he actually doesn't level up, but he down levels every time you level up. He gets weaker. I mean, cool guy nonetheless, I guess. Then we have Edge. So now Edge is really cool. I'd seen him in other games. I'd heard about him, and I actually really liked, and I was kind of surprised as to how he acted in the game. I thought we were gonna get kind of like a Shadow type deal where he was gonna be like kind of mysterious, like doesn't talk much. But the fact that he's more of like Edgar in Final Fantasy VI, or he's just like a ladies' man and he's a prince and he's just kind of a butthole to people, and he talks a lot. I liked it. I liked him as a character because he kind of surprised me, but in the good way. He was really cool to me. Edge was actually one of my top characters. So anywho, the story goes on with these characters, each of them kind of joining the party and leaving as they pleased. So now that we've kind of talked about the characters, let's talk about the overarching story. So like most of these old school Final Fantasy games, you gotta go collect crystals, and the bad guy wants the crystals. Basically just that. Go get crystals, keep crystals away from bad guy. I don't really think I talked too much about Golbez later on in the video, so I might as well have this be that. Golbez was okay. He was alright. I'm noticing that's my reaction for a lot of the things that I talk about in this game, but anywho, I didn't dislike Golbez. I just didn't get to see enough of him. I see a little bit about him in the beginning, hear about him in the beginning, then I get to see a lot more about him near the very end, but I didn't see enough of him to really judge him fully. I will say little plot twist at the end, while some people didn't like it, I thought it was kind of cool. Anyways, let's keep going. Now, in terms of the story, kind of following Cecil's journey as he starts off as a Dark Knight and felt like the beginning of the game, he ends up turning into a Paladin. You have all these different members kind of come and go from your party, and then what really stands out to me is not so much everything in between, because yeah, there's some cute stuff like the whole thing with Gilbert and Tella and, you know, the daughter, Tella's daughter dying, like in the moment I'm like, oh, okay, like this is happening. You know, she appears as a ghost to Gilbert, like that's kind of roaming around in my mind. Palom and Porom, again, I told you, these are one of my top characters. Like again, I would put these in the higher tier. I really enjoy them. They end up dying. They end up sacrificing themselves for you in this game. Like literally turning themselves into stone. And I'm like, wow, like I was not expecting to them to just kind of like kill off these kids, but I really respected the game for it, and I was like, that was pretty cool. Tella ends up sacrificing himself at some point, you know, and ended up using all of his power, and he ends up dying too. So I'm like, oh, I mean, okay, like I guess it makes sense. Cool, okay, I can respect it. I can respect it in the way that y'all are going about it. And then you have Yang sacrifice himself, and this is where I started to kind of not really understand what was happening here. So I guess the room's like about to blow up, and instead of just having him run away with all the other characters, he kicks your characters and says, this is gonna blow up, you guys leave. And they're like, no, Yang, and he stays in there, and I don't know if he thought that he was gonna like jump on the bomb and cause less of an explosion or what, but I don't know, man. All I know is that once those doors closed, like everyone outside was safe, so I don't really see the need for him to be in there and die. So again, that happened, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna give it a pass because I really liked Yang, and the fact that you guys just killed off another character I really liked. Cool, okay. I don't really understand the death, but sure. All right, now they killed off Yang, good job. And then not even 5 to 10 minutes later, it felt like Sid ends up also sacrificing himself. And at this point, I'm starting to get a little bit like, bro, what is even happening, man? This wait time was pretty funny because he ends up kind of dark, kind of grim here, but he ends up jumping off of the flying ship with a bomb and says, hey, blows himself up with the bomb and says, talk about going out with the bang. So everyone's dying, and at some point even one of the main characters says something like, why does everyone, I think Kane says, why does everyone choose death so quickly? So at this point it's like, I understand that you guys killed them off, and like some of them at the beginning, like Tella and Parom and Palom, I really understood and I respected. Then when you ended up killing off Yang and Sid, I was like, I don't really get those. I don't think you had to do that. And then as we get closer to the end of the game, you find out that you, Cecil, are part alien. Yes, or Lunarian. We're just gonna call them aliens because they're not from Earth and they're from the moon. I think they're like a race of aliens that come from the moon and came to Earth and showed humans technology on how to build ships. So at some point you get into a giant whale ship from space that you summon through prayer, where inside that ship you end up fighting the 4 archfiends, you know, the 4 classic archfiends, and then you end up fighting like a Death Star, which is just a CPU, but it's like a black Death Star. Oh yeah, and before I forget to mention this, you end up finding out before the whole Death Star thing, and after you find out that you're an alien, that Golbez, the big bad guy, who is just like the main villain in this game, and in Dissida is the villain that shows up to represent Final Fantasy IV, Golbez, is your brother. And I'm like, okay, like that's another interesting twist, but okay, I guess, you know. Where it kind of started to go downhill for me was when you found out that Golbez was just being mind controlled, so he really never meant to do anything. He was just being controlled by this bigger, worse guy. And they end up doing this a lot with Kane as well. Multiple times he ends up betraying you guys, and oh, he's just being mind controlled, so that makes it okay. And yeah, through all this madness, you eventually go up to space. I'm not kidding, you go up to space and you go kill the big bad guy who's manipulating and has been controlling Golbez and all the other bad people on Earth, I guess. But then something happens that I remember how I said that I didn't really understand or appreciate them killing off Yang and Sid. Well, then they go and they take everything back, and it turns out Yang never really died, and they don't really show you how he didn't die. I had to look it up on the wiki, and maybe I just missed the lore. But I guess when he jumped in there and he exploded, some fairies were there to save him, or he was mortally wounded and then he got saved by fairies. So Yang doesn't die, so you're like, okay, I guess it was kind of cheap even the way that you saved him, but okay, I guess Yang's not dead. But then you find out that Sid's also not dead, which I also kind of get why, but no, I get even less. The dude blew himself up, but okay, Sid's not dead. But then you also find out that Palom and Porom aren't dead either, and you're like, alright, this is all just a whole bunch of bologna sandwich. And then like, It's almost like I didn't really appreciate the fact, like I didn't understand Yang's and Sid's death, but the fact that you went and just took it back almost made it worse. It's like you should have just left them dead. And the big other slap in the face was Palom and Porom, because I really felt like when they turned into stone, I thought that was super cool. And then of course you just kind of bring them back, and it's like, oh yeah, you thought they were dead. Well, no, they just got restored by the Elder, and it's like, okay, that's kind of cheap, but so be it. And the game finally ends with this whole thing of like, you know, now that Cecil finds out that Golbez is his brother, he's supposed to like love him, and everyone's like, dude, that's your brother, man, like you gotta go be good friends with your brother. And Cecil's like, no, I don't know, and like he's not really accepting his brother, which I don't really get why he would, and why everyone thinks that just because he's his brother. But that's just kind of it. They kill the big bad guy. Nobody really died. I think Rosa and Cecil end up getting married. Kane goes off to go train and become stronger. Golbez is now up in the moon, living with the other old guy who's also a Lunarian alien dude. It's just kind of it. That's just kind of it. There were things that I really loved about the story, like Rydia as a character and how they went about her, you know, being young and her mother getting killed off, and the way that she ends up joining Cecil, with Cecil being the one who technically killed her mother, and then her growing up and coming back as like this really powerful mage. Like, I loved that. I really loved that. They would do something really cool in this game, and then they would do something that would kind of disappoint me. I really liked the Palom and Porom part, but then I didn't like that they just brought them back. You find out that Golbez is Cecil's brother, and I'm like, oh man, they could actually do something really cool with this. But then you have the whole thing about, you know, them going to the moon and them being from space, and then I just didn't really vibe with that whole thing. It didn't resonate with me, like him being half alien and all that. Cecil being really cool, having like his Dark Knight armor and then his Paladin armor, and then you find out that they didn't really go about it the right way, because he just feels like a good character the entire time, so it's kind of hard to really feel that change. So do you see what I'm saying? There's a lot of things about this game that I really enjoyed, but then there were a lot of things that I didn't enjoy. So it's just kind of like neutral. Like, I'm not saying it's a bad game at all. I can't even say that I disliked playing it. It was just like a roller coaster of emotions. And I just being completely honest, without trying to offend anyone here, out of all the 6, this is probably the one that I had the least amount of fun with. And I will say, like I said earlier during the review, partially I think it's because of when I played it, you know? I think if I would have played 1, 2, 3, 4, I would have appreciated, you know, some of the things that they did with the story and how they started to get a little bit more, you know, deep with the characters. But unfortunately, since I had already played 6, it's hard to not compare the two. So that kind of covers the whole story and the characters thing. The gameplay. I like having my characters, being able to level them up and get attached to my characters and give them weapons and items and be like, okay, I'm seeing the growth. This is my little squad. This person's this level. This person has these moves. Like, I'm feeling it. I'm excited for them to level up. It was really hard to have this feeling when characters were constantly joining and leaving my party, and some being in my party, leaving, and then coming back, and then just like not having like a solid squad of consistent characters that I could level up, and then just like, you know, because I was constantly just like, well, they might leave, they might come back. At least in Final Fantasy 2, you have your main 3, and then one character constantly changes in and out. Not in this one. In this one, you have 5 characters, and the only one who really stays the entire time is Cecil. And you have other characters that kind of bounce in and out, but that was just the thing that just kind of was like a huge oof. I think that they did a really good job at still keeping the game balanced, even when they put, you know, Cecil level 0. Like, I feel like it didn't feel like too bad of a grind to level them back up. But that's not the point. It's not it's not about like, oh, well, you got me my character back, and they're at a level where it doesn't feel like I lost too much. It's more so just the fact that they kept coming and going. And that, I think, pretty much sums up my Final Fantasy IV experience. Again, as I've said, I already said this, but I don't think it's a bad game. I really do think that I would have appreciated it a lot more if I wouldn't have played it after having played 5 and 6. And if I would have directly played it after 1, 2, and 3, I think I would have really enjoyed this game more than I did. Final Fantasy IV deserves its spot in this franchise. I think it's good. I think it needed to happen. And even though personally it's not my top Final Fantasy game, I respect it. And I love the way that so many of these characters look. And again, my love for Rydia is there. Like, she looks so cool. You know, I still think that Cecil as a paladin and the whole hero vibe he gives off is really cool. Rosa is one of the coolest white mages out there. Kane is my first time that I've had a Dragoon on my team that I got to keep and be like, yo, this guy's so cool. There are good things about this game, so I respect and appreciate Final Fantasy IV. Please let me know what you all think of this game in the comments down below.
Okay, so I also want to include this section just because I went through the trouble of looking up all the story and playing a little bit of Final Fantasy the After Years. No, I didn't complete it myself, but yes, I ended up doing all the research, watching all the cutscenes, and really grasping what the whole story is about. And no, I don't think I'm gonna make a whole separate video on this game, so I'm just gonna include it here. So first of all, Final Fantasy IV Interlude is very, very small. I don't even know if it's, you know, worth considering its own game. Let's really talk about the after years. That's what I want to focus on here. I also want to say that I think playing this game made me appreciate the first one so much more, because I think the first one did a really good job at setting up the characters to start off with. They all looked really cool in the first game, and sheesh, has this game really stepped it up. And oh my gosh, Final Fantasy IV has some of the best music ever. I don't know why I didn't mention that earlier in the video. I love Final Fantasy IV's music. Now, remember how a huge thing that I complained about was all the Sikes? Like, oh, this character died off. Oh wait, just kidding. Okay, so playing this game made me appreciate those Sykes a lot more. Why? Because a lot of characters who they killed off and then brought back to life, I am so grateful that they did. Especially when it comes to Palom and Porom. Man, it was so cool to see them grown up. Just being able to see them as adults, their own individual characters, and all the ambitions that they have as grown-ups. What they want to do with their lives. And actually getting to see some of these characters actually couple up and get together. It was cool. Some of them having kids even. Yang has a child named Ursula. Or freaking Rose and Cecil having a kid named Sarah. Theodore? Oh man. Point is, it was cool seeing what happened with these characters in the after years. I love the concept of this game. Now, I wasn't expecting this game to originally be like a direct sequel. I was expecting to be like extra content, kind of how they, you know, what they did with Final Fantasy II. But this was cool. And again, mostly because I got to see all these characters grow up and see what their kids are like. Don't get me wrong, I'm all for leaving things up for the imagination as to what we think could have happened. I think it can be kind of risky when a game or a movie does show us what happened to these characters, especially if you like them so much to begin with. But I think this game, for me personally, did a great job at showing me an even cooler version of these characters in the future. Now let's talk about why some people don't like this game. In the first game, obviously the whole point, or a big point of it, is Cecil going from a Dark Knight to a Paladin. In this game, Kain goes from being a Dragoon to a Holy Dragoon. And again, like, I understand why some people didn't like that, but I loved it. I loved everyone's glow up. Edge looks cool. Param looks so much cooler. Obviously, I think Kain's transformation is really cool. It's pretty interesting getting to see Edward find another girl. Yang being a little bit more grown up and having a kid. Oh, also, Golbez being in this game. I love how they went about bringing him back into the game. Having a little bit of a redemption quest here. Getting to see what Golbez looks like without the armor. All I know is that a lot of the things in this game that were plot twists, I really enjoyed. Would I say that this makes up for Final Fantasy IV in my first impressions and turns it into one of my favorite games? Probably not, but I definitely think that this game helped a lot. And again, I'm clearly the weird one here. A lot of people didn't like it. Gameplay wise, it does try to mix up a little bit, but at least for me, it wasn't anything super substantial to make it stand out. But again, I think for what it is as a game on its own, as the first sequel for any Final Fantasy game ever, I think it killed it. And I think it really solidified a lot of these characters that I already kind of enjoyed in Final Fantasy IV and made me like them even more. Okay, now we move on to Dissida.
So now let's talk about the Dissida portion of this game. I didn't really see anything in the Dissida story that made it, you know, stand out to me, or that they really tried driving it home. Again, the whole him being dark and evil to then him being good. The whole story in Dissida is about him being part of a team and him relying on his teammates and him wanting to be with his teammates. And Golbez is like, you shouldn't rely on your teammates because you're not going to be strong. And then, not Chaos, but the good lady is like, yeah, he's actually right. You shouldn't rely on your teammates. And then at the end, Cecil's like, I'm going to rely on my teammates though. And then, you know, he goes and he fights Golbez and he gets the crystal. So you know, also out of all of them, not the most enjoyable Dissida story for me. You know, I kind of struggled seeing some of the connections there. At least something that I kind of enjoyed is at the end of Final Fantasy IV. You clearly see that there's no hardcore beef between Golbez and Cecil, and you could say that you kind of get that vibe as well in Final Fantasy Dissida with Cecil's story. Like, you don't really see heavy beef between Golbez and Cecil, so I guess that's kind of nice. Now let's talk about how the character plays. I don't know if it's this might be a factor that I've gone so long without playing Dissida that I just felt really rusty, but I also just really struggled with using Cecil as a character in Dissida. Like the way that he fights is very I struggled with it. His HP attacks in the air, especially the one you start off with, just feels really slow. And his ground HP attack also feels like it's really close range. You do eventually unlock some better ones. Now, the coolest thing about Cecil is that it's almost like having two characters in one. Kind of like a Pyra and Mithra thing in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. You can change Cecil between his Paladin form and his Dark Armor form in mid-match. He's a tricky character to use, and I feel like I struggled the most with him, but I still think he's really cool. That does it for the Dissida portion of this video. Wow. So now we're gonna jump into the final section, and probably what I'm most excited for. So this being the last Final Fantasy games in terms of the ones that are pixelated, I can finally complete my collection. Let me show you what I mean through my phone. Check this out. We got 6, 5, 1, 2, and 3. I know he stands out a little bit, and then we got your boy back there too with Poke Squad. But anyways, I can finally add Cecil to the squad, and I'm so excited about it. So we're not really gonna dilly-dally here. We're just gonna jump right into it. So this box has already kind of been opened, and again, I'm not gonna do the whole tape thing, because last time I did that, I felt really kind of silly. The good thing is the box is in pretty good condition, so we're just gonna go ahead and open it up, and we are gonna stab what's inside here. Don't worry, not the character. Oh, here we go, dude. Here we go. So we really only have a couple things to open up here, so I guess let's go ahead and do it. We're gonna be really careful here. I really like that he comes, ooh, there we go, that he comes in his light form. I think having him in his dark outfit as well would have been really cool, but I don't mind this at all. Aha! Stab, stab, stab. Okay, so once again, let me show you all on the phone cam. All right, here he is. Holy smokes, dude. The amount of detail on this guy. It literally is between Furion and this guy in terms of just pure looks of how cool they are. I think this guy might be the coolest little statue I have so far, the first 6. Just really well made and really cool design. Getting a little bit more of a close-up view, like he just looks absolutely dope. Wow. All right. And now my collection will be complete. Alright everyone, well that is gonna do it. After almost a year of me not finishing another Final Fantasy game, I am so glad that we're continuing on with this series, and I did it. I finally finished Final Fantasy IV. Again, please know that this is entirely subjective, and this is just kind of what I think. Hopefully I didn't offend anyone out there, and if I did, I'm sorry, okay? Just know I still enjoy the game. I can still respect it. But anyways, yeah, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to leave a like, don't forget to leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe to one of the most amazing YouTube families out here. And on that note, everyone, I love you, Wolfpack, and I will see you all next time. Gonna start streaming Final Fantasy VII in case y'all are interested. Either look up Aethel Wolf streams on YouTube or look up Aethel Wolfpack on Twitch. See you there.